If you've been watching the Greysteel channel, you've heard me mention on several occasions a term called the Sick Aging Phenotype. This term is a shorthand I use to describe a very prevalent constellation of characteristics that go together all the time in people who age poorly. The Sick Aging Phenotype and its components is a convenient shorthand, a convenient way to think about the therapeutic targets of our lifestyle medicine, our diet, our habits, and particularly our exercise prescription. But what is it exactly? Hi, I'm Jonathon Sullivan, and welcome back to Greysteel. In episode 4, I told you about the noted aging biologist Robert Arking and his 77 aging phenotypes. And I told you that, notwithstanding all the way things can go wrong for the aging adult, some of these unhealthy aging phenotypes go together all the time. As a physician, when I see one, I usually see some of the others. In medicine, we use the term syndrome to describe a set of clinical features that frequently go together. The sick aging phenotype that I'm going to tell you about is a kind of syndrome, or as I like to call it, a meta-syndrome. It's a syndrome of syndromes, if you will. It's important that I share with you that the sick aging phenotype is a concept of my own fevered imagination. It's an idea that's still in its infancy. It's based heavily on my own experiences as a physician, but it's not part of the generally accepted medical lexicon or dialogue. In other words, it's just something I made up. But one of its central components, one of the syndromes that it contains, is not, and that is the metabolic syndrome. When I was still a young resident training in emergency medicine, I heard one of our specialty's greatest educators, I think it was you, Diane Birnbaumer, use the term diattentionalicity to describe the metabolic syndrome. It really stuck with me because although I understood the metabolic syndrome from an academic perspective, the term diattentionalicity really resonated with what I was seeing in the emergency department and on the medical wards every day during my training. Diattentionalicity: diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, and obesity. That's the metabolic syndrome in a nutshell. 4 very nasty horsemen that always ride together and lay human beings to waste. Definitions of the metabolic syndrome vary depending on who you read, but the generally accepted components of the metabolic syndrome are central obesity, meaning obesity around the trunk, which is a marker for abnormal energy balance and visceral fat, or fat around the internal organs. Hypertension, or high blood pressure. Elevated fasting plasma glucose, or high blood sugar, a marker of insulin resistance. High serum triglycerides, or abnormal levels of fat in your blood. And low HDL levels, or not enough good cholesterol. I don't think you need a doctor to tell you that none of those things are good for you. And it shouldn't be a stretch for anybody who stayed awake in biology or health class to see how insulin resistance and high fasting serum glucose can lead to diabetes, or how hypertension and dyslipidemia can lead to cardiovascular disease. Metabolic syndrome, and more particularly the insulin resistance that lies at its core, are keystones of the sick aging phenotype. But the sick aging phenotype has other critical features that are not part of the classic definition of the metabolic syndrome. Systemic inflammation isn't part of the classic definition of the metabolic syndrome, but maybe it should be, because they seem to go together. We touched on this a few episodes back when we mentioned inflammation, how chronic, simmering inflammatory processes cause tissue degeneration and disease, including cardiovascular and joint diseases. Sarcopenia means decreased muscle mass, and it's a natural fellow traveler with a metabolic syndrome, because the loss of muscle mass means the loss of strength, which goes with lack of exercise, and cellular resistance to insulin signaling, or insulin resistance, which is a principal driver of the metabolic syndrome. Osteopenia means the loss of bone mineral density, and it goes hand in hand with aging, a sedentary lifestyle, and with the loss of muscle mass. It also goes with frailty. Frailty is itself a well-recognized syndrome, and osteopenia and sarcopenia are critical components. Frailty may be defined as a geriatric syndrome predisposing to increased risk of injury and catastrophic deterioration in health and function. More simply put, frailty is exactly what it sounds like. When you're frail, you're easy to break. The final components of the sick aging phenotype are polypharmacy and medical dependence. Polypharmacy is just a fancy word that means lots of drugs, and it's endemic in older populations in developed countries. It's easily diagnosed when the patient presents with a shopping bag full of prescription medicines, most of which are redundant, unneeded, or which even interact with each other in unwholesome ways. This is actually a disease that harms and even kills people. I've seen patients in the ER who are on 30 or more different prescription medications, which, oddly enough, had not returned them to even a semblance of good health. Medical dependence goes hand in hand with polypharmacy and with the sick aging phenotype, and it simply means that the individual spends a significant portion of their lives under medical care, undergoing procedures, being hospitalized, seeing multiple doctors, and frequenting emergency departments. So, that's the sick aging phenotype. The sick aging phenotype is a sedentary, overfed existence leading to obesity, decreased muscle mass and bone density, insulin resistance, systemic inflammation, and the metabolic syndrome. Frailty, polypharmacy, and medical dependence are not far behind, nor are type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, chronic pain, impotence, and loss of independence. For those of you who like horror stories, this meta-syndrome is described in rather more gory detail in part 1 of our new book, The Barbell Prescription. The good news is that the sick aging phenotype is a target-rich environment. Some of the components of the sick aging phenotype are influenced by environmental and genetic factors, to be sure, factors that we can't control. But the available evidence makes it abundantly clear that all of the components of the sick aging phenotype can be addressed by lifestyle medicine and particularly exercise medicine. Any form of vigorous exercise will have a beneficial impact on the sick aging phenotype. But understanding how it develops and how it's structured gives us clues as to how to best tailor an exercise prescription to fight unhealthy aging. The most effective and rational exercise prescription will have specific activity against as many of the components of the sick aging phenotype as possible. As I argue at length in the book, I think strength training is a particularly effective way of approaching this problem. And as it turns out, this form of exercise meets other criteria for the exercise prescription, as we'll see in future episodes. But I want to emphasize that any form of exercise, as long as it doesn't get you hurt, is better than no exercise. Exercise is the most powerful medicine in the world, especially for the aging adult. And if you aren't engaged in a vigorous exercise program, you are opening the door to the sick aging phenotype. We're going to talk about the specific requirements of the exercise prescription in the next episode. But there's no need to wait for that. If you aren't already physically active, you need to get active today. So, watch the credits while you put on your walking shoes and tell the dog to go fetch his leash. It's nice outside. Thanks for watching this episode of Greysteel. Our content is for educational and infotainment purposes only and will never be offered as medical advice for any particular person, patient, disease, or condition. When it comes to your health, you should work closely with your physician. Thanks to all of our patrons on Patreon who help make the Greysteel channel possible. If you'd like to help us make more of these episodes, go to patreon.com/Greysteel. Or if you just want to keep learning more about healthy aging, go to our website, follow us on Facebook, check out the doobly-doo for interesting links related to this episode, and don't forget to go to youtube.com/Greysteel and subscribe to our channel. Stay strong and stay healthy.